Welcome and thank you for joining our Damage Description and Dimensions DDD Review presented by the Public Assistance Training section. Today we're going to explore the process of reviewing the Damage Description and Dimensions, commonly known as the DDD. So again, this is a micro training. The purpose of this training is just to highlight some of the FEMA resources related to the DDD development and review. So first we want to start off talking about our damage information and when we're creating our DDD. So we know that our damage information is the foundation of our overall project award. And so we want to ensure that when we're conducting that site inspection and then we're creating that DDD, that our information is accurate and thorough and complete. And then also we know that our DDD is developing phase 2 of the PA delivery model. And in that phase, when the DDD is developed, our applicant should agree with FEMA on the information that's in the site inspection report and that DDD before we move into phase 3. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the introduction, our damage description and dimensions components, our damage description and dimensions review process, and site inspection, damage description and dimensions review, grant process, and grants manager. So first of all, for the introduction, it comes into play at the beginning of the PA delivery model and in describing our damage description and dimensions. Then we have our components, which our components are divided into 6 parts, and we're going to show how it's related to the DDD. And then we have our review process, which is the focusing, our site inspector is focusing on that internal review process from the site inspector perspective. Make sure they're checking their work and having someone else to review the work. So those are the things that we're going to discuss as part of this micro training. So what is the damage description and dimensions? So when we talk about damage, we're talking about the description of the dimensions, the materials, and the design of the incident-related damage components of the facility. So that damage we are describing is a description. Then we talk about description. What is description? It captures the facility's design, the function, and the capacity. And it also can include the cause of damage and any work that has been conducted to date. So it shows us, the description will tell us what the facility was like prior to the incident. And we want to keep in mind that the overall general damage includes the entire damage of the facility, while we also have those individual damage components, which can either be work to be completed or work that has been completed. So we want to remember that. And then lastly, we have our dimensions. And this information, we capture the measurements of what was actually damaged during the incident. And we want to ensure that our dimensions, they should be exact and they should be agreed upon by our site inspector and by our applicant. Because again, the site inspector is gathering this information during that site inspection, and they will have to enter this information into grants manager. So we know that once the site inspector is entering their information, that the DDD is automatically generated. And that DDD should mirror exactly what has been recorded on that site inspection report. So why does the DDD matter? As you can see on the screen, we have one of our FEMA pyramids. And at the base of that pyramid, the foundation, we have that damage description and dimensions. Then we have our scope of work and then have our costs. So everything in this pyramid is built upon this foundation. And so that's why it's important that we're meticulous and precise and accurate as possible when we're gathering this information and inputting this information. Because again, this is the foundation presented for a project, for future project development, and as part of this process. So we want to ensure that we have the most accurate, thorough, complete information. And then we have a yellow sticky note here that reads, every DI number will require its own DDD. So we just want to remember that every individual damage will have require its own DDD. On the screen, we have the program delivery model. We have our phase 1, the operational planning. We have our phase 2, damage intake and eligibility review, we have our Phase 3, scoping and costing, and Phase 4 and 5, review and obligation. As you can see, we have on the screen highlighted that the DDD occurs as part of the damage inspection and doing that site inspection report. So again, this is the process. Once the site inspection has been completed, then our DDD is developed. Our site inspector goes and input that information and input their findings from that site inspection. So this is done in a comprehensive and complete, thorough manner. So we want to make sure that we get that applicant's concurrence and signature, because again, this is done in Phase 2, and we don't want anything to hinder the application from moving forward into Phase 3. So we want to ensure that we have everything complete. Here's essentials for creating that DDD. As you can see on the screen, we have a green check and a red X. So a green check means yes, and a red X means no. So the things that are essential for creating that DDD, it should only contain the damaged items. We should have our photo page, our location map, our floodplain map, our insurance mitigation and EHP issues, and our methods of repair. What we should not have or be concerned, or that is essential to creating that DDD, are eligibility concerns, our site inspector opinions, grammar or spelling errors. Those are the things that we should not have as part of our DDD, creating our DDD. And we just want to remember for the top part, when we're creating our location map and our photo page, that depending on the size of the event or how many locations, that there may be multiple pages. So we want to make sure we want to make sure we have enough pages of the information that we include everything and not to leave out anything when we're creating our photo page and our location map, and making sure we have the correct identification. So now let's talk about the DDD components. So Part 1 is the general facility. Part 2 is our general damage information. Part 3 is damage details. Part 4, methods of repair. Part 5, hazard mitigation, insurance, and EHP considerations. And Part 6, additional information. So we're going to just go over these 6 parts, and just to remember that this is the information that is gathered during that actual site inspection. So Part 1, as you can see on the screen, how the DDD is related to the site inspection report in Part 1 and 2. So we have Part 1, our general facility information, and then Part 2, our general damage information. And again, this is a Category E information, and it depends on what category of work that you are inspecting. Depends on, this information could look different, again, depending on which category of work you are conducting. So we want to ensure that we have the right or the correct site inspection report for the correct category of work in which we're inspecting. So that would make sure everything lines up and is in compliance when we're entering the information in Grants Manager. So again, on this Part 1 and Part 2, what facility, general facility information and general damage information, it's asking for facility information. It's asking for physical location, date damaged, age of facility, legal responsibility, GPS coordinates. So all that information is Part 1 and Part 2 of the site inspection report, which is captured on page 1. And so we want to ensure we're being detailed as possible when we're gathering this information. What's in a complete DDD? Part 1 and Part 2 continue. So we have the overall cause of damage to the facility. We want to be detailed as possible. When we're describing that facility, describe the facility as it existed prior to the event, we want to include the information related to the condition of that facility prior to the event and its pre-disaster function. And then the facility description, again, we talked about that. So for an example, a facility was originally designed as a dining room, but prior to the disaster, it was being used as a warehouse. Or another example could be a facility was designed as a school prior to the disaster, but it was being used as a community center. So these are just 2 examples that if we want to ensure we identify that information, It should be identified and documented as part of that site inspection report, because we need to know what was its pre-disaster function and capacity and design, because then also that will help us down the line when we ask the questions, will the applicant be changing anything about the facility? So we need to ask those questions and get that information. And on the screen, here's an example of wording of a cause of damage. And when we're describing our cause of damage, we want to ensure that we're detailed, that it's easy to read and easy to understand. During the site inspection or on the site inspection report, sometimes the site inspector will simplify the cause of damage based on the incident type. For example, they will use a hurricane or a severe storm or a tornado. Those are only the event's incident type, not the cause of damage. So the cause of damages are the results produced by the incident. So we want to be detailed as possible when we're saying the cause of damage was flooding, wind-blown debris, hurricane-driven winds, high-velocity waters, etc. So again, the example on the screen reads, wind-driven rain removes portions of the roofing and exterior structure, causing the wind-driven debris to damage building exterior structure components and elements. Rainfall entered the building through the damaged roof and surface. Flood waters entered the building to an approximately depth of 17 inches. So again, this is an example of cause of damage wording. Part 3 of our site inspection report. This looks at the damage details or damage components. And this will be the same on page 3 of the site inspection report for all categories of permanent work, which are categories C through G. And as you can see, it talks about dimensions, quantities, materials, cause, and calculations. And so we want to ensure what information is the site inspector gathering. They have to have that site number. We have the block here for the site number. What is the damage component? What is the damage component? The GPS locations, the damage dimensions, the methods of repair information, cause of damage, force, is it going to be completed by contract, force count labor, the percentage of the work that has to be completed, and also our quantities in units, such as square feet, cubic yards. And once again, this information, we're building that foundation. This information is very key for the development, for the scope and cost of work of future projects. So we want to make sure this information is accurate. Part 3, what is a complete DDD? We want to describe and quantify specific disaster-related damages. We want to clearly identify cause of damages to each individual component at that facility. And we want to use the correct units of measurement. And also, so again, we want to clearly identify cause of damage to each individual component. And we want to ensure that our site inspection is done in a sequential order. So when we go in the room, if we're starting at the ceiling and working our way down to the floor, or we're working from the left side of the room to the right side of the room, or vice versa. We just want to ensure that we have an order so we don't miss any damage components or any of the damages, and we're not conducting our site inspection in just a random fashion. So this will help us not miss any components. And then we want to also ensure that we're using correct calculations for units of measurement. So here are some tips for correct calculations, and we're using this one. We're talking about dimensions. And so each individual measure shall remain in a common unit. So for example, if the wall length dimension is 10 feet by 3 inches by 10 feet by 9 inches in height by 6 inches in thickness, it would be entered as 10.25 feet long, 10.75 height by 6 inches in depth. And all dimensions would be entered in as feet. As you can see here, we have the dimension type, length time height time thickness, and the length, height, everything would be entered in as feet. So we would have to convert the inches into feet. And so in order to convert the inches into feet, we would take the 6 and divide it by 12, since there are 12 inches in the foot, and that would give us our measurements. So dimensions for length width, or height, and we're talking about length of roads, width of roads, height of buildings, width of sidewalks. So we have our length time width time height here, as you can see, it's shown on the slide. But there are other dimension types such as length time width, or length time height, length time diameter, diameter only. And as you can see from this slide, we have the length time width time height. And then once the information is inputted, the drop down is populated, and then this information would be selected. The correct information would be selected. For area, same type of information. We have our area, quantity type, and when we're looking at area, we're looking at walls, floors, roofs, ceilings, parking lots, metal decks, and open surfaces. And then we have a sticky note here. Doors and windows are not calculated in the area. So just remember that. We have to put our quantity type here, and then our drop down would appear. Next, we have volume. And again, when we're looking at volume, we're talking about the amount of space that a substance or object occupies, or that is within an enclosed container. So again, we're looking at debris, fluids, water, concrete, asphalt. And then we have our volume listed here, our quantity, cubic yard, cubic foot, cubic meter, etc. Now we're going to look at how the DDD populates based on the input of your damage component. So we're going to look at that relationship between the data entry and the damage preview information. As you can see, we have a split screen here. So on the left-hand side, we can see we have filled in our damage component information. We have our component description, our damage description, cause, dimension, all the information there is populated. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see this is our DDD Preview tab. And this gives you a layout of the information, the damage component information that you have just inputted, and with the drop-down boxes. So this is a good tool to use when you're entering your information into Grants Manager, because it allows you to see the information you inputted, and it gives you the opportunity to see if it reads correctly. So Part 4 talks about methods of repair, and as you can see here on the screen, we have the methods of repair, box yellow, box highlighted, and you can see the methods of repair. And what is methods of repair? It is the plan or the action identified by the applicant, not identified by FEMA, but identified by the applicant, of how they wish to repair each of the damages included in the damage component list. So this is the applicant telling us how they want to repair. And then also the methods of repair is used to validate or support the costs that the applicant has claimed related to work that has been completed. So if the applicant has said they've completed 50% of work, it should be identified, and we can have it documented on the site inspection report. So it's used to validate or support that claim. And then also we know that this methods of repair information is used in the development of our scope and cost of work for work to be completed. So this is all critical information that we want to make sure that's accurate, because again, this is part of that foundation on which everything else is going to be built upon for our applicant. And so for our methods of repair, the questions that we want to ask: who will perform the work? This question applies to both completed work and work to be completed. So we want to find out, is it going to be contract or force account labor? And again, we want to find out for the work that has been completed, we want to ask these questions as well. We also want to ask, will there be any changes to materials for repairs? So we want to find out that answer, because, for example, the applicant may want to change a deck from wood to metal, or they want to change a culvert from concrete to PVC. So we want to ask that question. Next, we want to ask, will there be any changes to pre-disaster design, materials, capacity, footprint, or function? So for an example, the applicant may want to elevate a platform or a deck to avoid same damages in the future. So again, we need to ask that question. And then if there are changes in the material or pre-disaster design and function, what is the reason for changing the facility from its original design? And then we also want to find out, did the applicant have to complete any emergency work, such as setting up barricades or staging area? So we want to ask those questions. And again, this information that we gather here as part of the methods of repair are not entered into the damage component section of the DDD, this information is captured and entered into that methods of repair information. Next, how the DDD is related to the SRR, and now we're going to talk about Part 5, hazard mitigation, insurance, and EHP considerations. And as you can see from the screen, we have the EHP information listed up on the screen. And we know that this is located at the end of the site inspection report. And there are a series of questions that are related to hazard mitigation, EHP, and insurance. And so we have to go through and ask our applicant these questions to get the information so we can document it accurately. Because if we need to have our EHP or hazard mitigation specialist involved early on, the better, to ensure that our applicant understands the part that deals with hazard mitigation and EHP, because they could be new to FEMA, never dealt with this information before. So again, these are the questions that deal with hazard mitigation. We want to identify the specific cause of damage. Does the applicant plan to perform additional work to protect damaged facilities against similar damage? Will the applicant provide a proposal for hazard mitigation work? Would the applicant like FEMA to prepare a proposal for hazard mitigation? So again, we want to ask this question. We want to ask these questions of our applicant. And then for the number one specifically, we want to find out what was the cause, what caused the damage. Was it water flooding? Was it wind-blown debris? What was the cause of damage? So again, we want to ask and go through and ask these questions of our applicant. So here's an example of site inspection, special consideration question number one for our site inspection. And this information on the screen, we're just highlighting that this shows that our applicant and our site inspector had a conversation. And this is what the applicant told us. And the applicant stated that rising flood water eroded under the spillway slab and eroded the embankment. Debris impact damaged the dam gates, overtopping flood water, eroded the driving surface of the dam. So again, the site inspector described the cause of damage, and it clearly stated that the applicant stated or the applicant mentioned. So again, that shows that the conversation was had between the site inspector and the applicant. Site inspection question number two, we have a yellow sticky here. It talks about using action verbs: realign, relocate, elevate, install, replace, or anchor. And the answer to the question, the applicant checked yes, and so the site inspector documented what the applicant said. The applicant stated they plan to add riprap or natural plantings to protect the embankment, install debris deflection devices to protect the dam gates, or install a concrete driving surface on the dam. So again, this just shows the conversation was had. Part 5, we're still on Part 5 in it, insurance. So does the damaged facility have insurance, and or is it an insurable risk? So this is confirmation or identifying from our applicant, on behalf of our applicant, if they have insurance or whether or not the facility is covered. FEMA is legally prohibited from duplicating benefits from other sources, and FEMA will reduce eligible costs by the amount of insurance proceeds received. So again, this is just identifying or confirming whether there is insurance or not on the facility. Next, we have 8 environmental and historic preservation questions. And we want to ask our applicant these questions and identify if our applicant has any environmental and historic preservation concerns, because therefore we can bring in our EHP specialist early on, identify any concerns, or work with our applicant, because we want to ensure that they understand, our applicant understands all the federal funded, the laws, the executive orders regarding federally funded projects, and that they must comply with EHP. So again, we have 8 questions. I won't read all 8 questions. And here are the next 4 questions. So once again, we want to just ensure that our applicant understands. I know it's a lot of questions at the end, but we have to go through them and ask the questions and not just put our own opinions in there, because again, it could affect information down the line or project costs or information. If we didn't have EHP and then we come out and find out there's an environmental or hazard mitigation concern later on, that could cause issues for our applicant. Part 6, we talk about additional notes or comments. And what is put in this section? This is information that the site inspector can put in the report for information that was not covered throughout previous section of the DDD. So this may include information that deals with accessibility restrictions within an area section of the damaged site, any damaged components indicated by the applicant but not found during the inspection, and then any other information pertinent to the damaged facility that could affect the project developments. What we do not want to put here are the opinions, the site inspector opinions, or anything to do with eligibility. We do not want to put that information there. Next, let's talk about the DDD review process. And as you can see on the screen, we have the DDD review process. This is an internal process that we can utilize before we're submitting our information. And so it just says here the site inspector reviews the DDD. Go over your information, make sure everything looks good, it's accurate. Check for grammar, spelling errors. Check your quantity, your dimensions, your calculations. Double check that information. And then it says proceeds to an internal review. So have a peer or two review your information. And then send it to your site inspector crew lead and or site inspector task force lead for review. And utilize the site inspector DDD checklist. So therefore this information, once you send it to a peer for a review, they can check off some things or document and then send it back. And then we have the PDMG review. Submit the DDD to the PDMG, and then the PDMG reviews the DDD. And then they have their checklist that they're going to use. So again, this is just information that we use internally when we're going through the process before we're submitting the information in Grants Manager. So here is information. Next, we're going to talk about the checklist for the site inspector and internal review process. This information here, this information is not the most recent information. It has been updated recently, so we can provide the most accurate information at the end of the presentation. And also, we just want, as this yellow sticky note, we want to refer you to the site inspection job aid for details on how to conduct your site inspection. So let's just talk a little bit about the site inspection job aid. And in that, we have a checklist. And in the checklist, it's a helpful tool for you to utilize when conducting your site inspection or before entering your information. And then we have step 1, which identifies, it talks about your core documents. It talks about your site inspection report, your photos, your location map, your floodplain map. It talks about the naming convention and how to upload your documents in the Grants Manager. It talks about your GPS coordinates. And then it moves to step 2, and in step 2 it talks about verifying your information, your DDD information in Grants Manager. And it provides specific details on verifying that site inspection report and that DDD, making sure that information matches up, making sure your calculations are correct, and verifying everything. And then in step 3, you're verifying your methods of repair information. You're going to review all your notes from your site inspection report and ensure that that information is in your review, methods of repair. And then make sure all your comments, information that you gather during that site inspection report are included in your DDD. And also in step number 3, it focuses on the quality of your photos. Because again, we know as site inspector, as part of the site inspection, our photos tell the story. They describe and capture the damage. So we want to make sure our photos are telling the correct story and it lines up with our site inspection report. And so there's more information within the site inspection job aid on that information. So the DDD checklist can be used, again, we talked about that DDD checklist used as an internal process between the site inspector and the site inspector peers and site inspector task force lead. So again, this is ensuring that information is accurate and thorough, and it could help eliminate the probability of rework or having errors. So that concludes our DDD review. But before we finish, I just have a couple more slides. We have our Grants Manager Grants Portal hotline. You can call that hotline and get assistance. We have our DHS Office of Inspector General hotline, and this is used to report corruption, waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement, and misconduct to the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General. We have the telephone number listed here as well as the physical address listed as well. And finally, we have our Procurement Guidance, or PDAT, and it's the review of the FEMA Procurement Disaster Assistance Team website. We have that information listed there. This provides guidance to our sub-recipients regarding federal procurement and contracting requirements. So that concludes our DDD review. We thank you for attending.